We continue now at the top of Daf Tzadi Gimel Amud Aleph in Meseches Bava Metzia. This is Bava Metzia Daf 93a. On the previous summit, the Gemara is dealing with the upcoming Mishnah. In the upcoming Mishnah, it says that an owner, let's say he's an owner of slaves who are minors, he's not allowed to say that the work you do, normally as a worker you would get food, but we're going to convert that into wages and I will take those wages. Since these slaves are minors, he is not able to do that. And the Gemara in the previous summit explained the reason why he's not able to do that is because we're assuming that the food that is taken by the workers is considered wages. Now, normally the owner is entitled to the wages of his slaves and minor slaves as well, but in this particular situation, the Mishnah is dealing with a case where the owner is not providing mizonos, he's not providing food to the slaves, and therefore he's not entitled to their wages. That's why he cannot make this arrangement with the slaves that are minors. And so the Gemara now says, that works according to the Mandamar, and only according to the Mandamar, who says that a master is not able to say to an Eved, you work for me, I get your wages, and I won't provide you mizonos. But according to the one who says, that a master could tell an Eved, he can say, work for me, I'm going to get your wages, and I'm not going to provide mizonos. So what difference does it make that he's not providing mizonos? It doesn't make a difference. He's able to say, anyhow, you work for me and I get your wages, so ma'ikol meimar. So then what are you going to say? How are you going to explain our Mishnah according to that? Rashi says, Hanicha pluksa b'Meseches Gittin. This is a machlokas in Meseches Gittin, whether a master can say to the Eved, Asei imi v'eini zoncha. And so the Gemara instead says, Ella rather, Idi v'idi b'she'ein mala lehen mizonos. Both the Mishnah, the upcoming Mishnah, and the Brisa we quoted on the previous summer, there was a contradiction there, whether you are able to make such an arrangement with avodim that are katanim. Both of them are talking where mizonos are not provided. We're talking again where the owner is not providing mizonos to the avodim. Uvaha pligi, and they're arguing as follows in exactly this issue. Demar savar yachol, that one holds that the master is able to say, you have to work for me anyhow. Umar savar ein yachol, and one holds, meaning our Mishnah holds, ein yachol, our Mishnah holds that you're not able, the master is not able to say to the avodim, you have to work for me anyhow, I'm entitled to your wages if I don't provide mizonos. You can't do that. That's why such an arrangement is not allowed according to the Mishnah. The Brisa says you could do that. That's why the arrangement is allowed. But the Gemara continues for Rabbi Yochanan. Now, according to Rabbi Yochanan, to Amar Yachol Harav, Rabbi Yochanan happens to hold Yachol Harav, that a master is able to say Asei imi veini zoncha. And now we're saying the Mishnah disagrees with that. The Mishnah says Ein Harav Yachol Omer le'eved Asei imi veini zoncha. So Shavik Masnis and Vavid Kibraisa, are we saying that Rabbi Yochanan would abandon the Mishnah and instead go like the Brisa? That doesn't make sense. And so the Gemara instead says Ela dekuli alma mishel shamayim hu ochel. Rather, everybody agrees, meaning both the Mishnah and the Brisa agree that when the worker takes food that's mishel shamayim, that is not considered to be wages, velo matzi katzitz, and therefore since it's mishel shamayim, you're really not allowed to make such an arrangement. The owner is not allowed to say that I'm going to take the food that goes to these minors, I'm going to take that food as wages. You can't say that because they're getting it mishel shamayim. Umay kotzitz. But then the question is, so what does it mean kotzitz? Do you have Reb Oshia, that Reb Oshia said in Reb Oshia's Brisa, it said he is allowed to be kotzitz when it comes to the minors. That means something else entirely. That means to say mizonos. It just means to say that he's allowed to give them mizonos to make them so full that they just won't take food. That's what he's allowed to do. But then the Gemara asks, if that's what kotzitz means, why can't you do that by an animal? You could do that by his animal as well. Tevin nokotzla, he can give the animal straw, and then the animal won't be hungry and won't eat. And so the Gemara finally says, Ella rather, b'hakam iflgi, here's what the machlokas is between the upcoming Mishnah and the Brisa before of Reb Oshia, Demar savar mishalohu ochel, that one holds that when the worker is taking food, that's mishalo, meaning essentially that's considered to be wages. That's what the Brisa holds, and that's why since it's considered to be wages, the owner is entitled to those wages. He's entitled to the wages, and he can therefore take those wages. He can take that food as wages. Umar savar, but one holds, meaning the Mishnah holds, mishel shamayim hu ochel, that really the worker, when he gets food, it's mishel shamayim, and therefore the owner has no right. The owner is not able to take that as wages. And Rashi explains, the Gemara said that both the Mishnah and the Brisa are talking where the master is not providing mizonos, and everybody agrees that the food that a worker takes is mishalo, meaning it's considered to be wages. And the question really is, when the master is not providing food, is he entitled to the wages or not? Essentially, is a master able to say to an Eved, Asei imi veini zoncha v'ha pligi? That's what they're arguing about, whether you can say to an Eved, Asei imi veini zoncha. But then the Gemara asks, Rabbi Yochanan, but according to Rabbi Yochanan, who says says that you are able to say asay imi ve'eni zancha, so it seems like he's abandoning the Mishnah. V'lo garsin ani hachi gedolim nami, do not have the girsa that they're asking about the adults. To amron yad yomachli, we already answered that in the previous Amud, that the adults are able to be mochel. And Rashi continues, the Gemara then suggested that both of the Mishnah and the Brisa agree mishal shamayim hu ochel, that really the worker takes food, it's mishal shamayim, va'afilu ma'ala mizonos, even if he would provide food, even if the owner provides food to the slave, lo motzi kaitz hakatanim, when it comes to minors, he's not able to take that food as wages because it's really mishal shamayim, he's not entitled. And if that's the case, umay kotzitz to Reb Oshia, so what does Reb Oshia mean when it says kotzitz? It sounds like you could make that arrangement with katanim. It actually means mizonos, it means food. What it means is sheyiten lahem mizonos, that the owner can give the food, he can give the slaves food ahead of time, meikara, ahead of time he can feed them, harbe, he can feed them a lot of food, shelo yuchlu lechel min ha'anofim, that way they won't be able to eat from the grapes. Essentially, it's talking about something else entirely. It's talking about a situation where he doesn't want them to eat from the grapes, so he feeds them, that he's allowed to do. But then the Gemara said if that's the situation over here, so then nakotzla, you could do the same thing by the animal. Datanya le'el, we learned in a brisa earlier, Rashoy balabayis lahater pekiya amir, it says that a balabayis is permitted to do exactly that. If he doesn't want them to eat from the grapes, he can feed, or if he doesn't want the animals to eat from the produce, he can feed them ahead of time. And so then finally the Gemara said that really the machlokus between the Mishnah and the brisa is whether mishalohu ochel or mishal shamayim. If it's mishalo, so then it's essentially wages, and he's allowed to take those wages for himself and say they're not entitled to the food. Again, talking about the minor slaves. But if we hold mishal shamayim, he can't do that. That's what the Mishnah holds. And Rashi explains, Mar savar Tana de brisa mishalohu ochel. The Tana of the brisa says that the worker's eating mishalo. It's essentially wages that the owner can take. Then it depends who we're following. If you're following Rabbi Yochanan, it doesn't matter if he's providing food or not. He's able to say asay imi ve'eni zancha, so he's entitled to those wages. Uvar plukse muki lavamala, the one who argues on Rabbi Yochanan will say we're talking about when food is being supplied, so again he's entitled to their wages. V'tana di don savar, and our Tana, meaning the Tana the Mishnah holds, mishel shamayim hu ochel, that the worker is getting food mishel shamayim. V'afilu ma'ala mizonos nami lo matzikayitz, even if the owner is providing mizonos to the slave, he's not able to make this arrangement because they're getting mishel shamayim and he is not entitled. The owner is not entitled. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah. This is the same Mishnah that was just quoted on the previous Amud. Kotzitz adam al yedei atzmo, a person is allowed to arrange that, again, if he's a worker, instead of taking food, he'll take wages. He can arrange that with the employer. Al yedei beno vito hagadolim, he can do the same arrangement with his son and daughter that are adults. Al yedei avdo v'shivchaso hagadolim, he can do the same arrangement with his slave and maidservant that are adults. And al yedei ishto, he can have the same arrangement with his wife, mimnei sheyesh ba and das, because all of these individuals, they have das, they have understanding, so they are able to be mochel, they're able to make such arrangements. And the Mishnah continues, Aval eno kotzitz al yedei beno vito hakatanim, he cannot make such an arrangement with his son or his daughter who's a minor. Velo al yedei avdo v'shivchaso hakatanim, also not with his slave or maidservants that are minors. Velo al yedei behemto, he can't make such an arrangement with his animal as well. Mimnei she'ein behen das, because there's no das in that situation. And so again, they're entitled to the food, they take the food as workers. And the Mishnah continues, Hasochres hapolim lasos beneta revoy shalo. This part of the Mishnah also was quoted on the previous Amud. If a person hires workers to work with neta revai, which is fourth year produce, hare elu lo yochlo, they can't eat those because, again, those have to be eaten in Yerushalayim. Im lo hodia, now if he didn't let them know that it was neta revai, so they thought they'd be able to eat and they're not able to eat, so he has an obligation, poda, he has to redeem that produce. He can redeem it onto money, umachil, and then he can give it to them to eat, because once it's redeemed, it can be eaten outside of Yerushalayim. And the Mishnah continues, Nisparsu agulav nispatchu chav Yosef. This also was quoted on the previous Amud. Let's say he has pressed figs that come apart. Let's say he has barrels that were sealed that become unsealed. Hare elu lo yochlu. So again, they're not allowed to eat in that situation because there was already a gemar malacha in terms of the obligation of meiser. Once you have an obligation once you have a gemar malacha for meiser, so the workers don't eat. And again, im lo hodian, if he didn't let them know, so they were not aware, they thought they would be able to eat. They didn't know that it was already pressed and it came undone. They didn't know it was already sealed and it became undone. So then ma'aser ma'achilan, he has a responsibility to take off the ma'aser himself and give them to eat. And finally, the Mishnah says, Shomrei Peiros, people who are guarding produce, Ochlin Mehilchas Medina, they are allowed to eat, but that's from the custom of the local place, Avalom in Torah, but that's not Midoraisa. It's not on a Doraisa level that they're entitled to eat. It's really only from the local custom. And Rashi explains, Mehilchas Medina, Kvar No Hagukain, that's already the Minhag, and so that's again the Minhag HaMedina. And the Gemara says, Shomrei Peros, when it comes to guards over produce that was mentioned at the end of the Mishnah, Amar Rav says, Lo Shanu El Shomrei Ginos Upardes. And the Mishnah is specifically talking about people who are guarding gardens and orchards, meaning to say it is food that is attached to the ground. Aval Shomrei Gitos Varemos, but if the people are guarding the wine press or the piled up food, Ochlin Minatora, so then on a Doraisa level, they're actually allowed to have from that produce. And the idea behind Rav, says the Gemara, is Kasava. Rav holds Mishamer Ka'osa Maisadami, that somebody who's guarding is in fact doing work. That's why on a Doraisa level they're entitled to that detached produce. Ushmuel Amar, and Shmuel says Lo Shanu El Shomer Gitos Varemos. On the contrary, the Mishnah is talking about when they're watching over detached produce, like in the wine press or when it's piled up. Aval Shomer Ginos Upardesim, but if they're watching over gardens and orchards where it's attached to the ground, then Einon Ochlim Lo Min HaTorah V'lo Mehilchos Medina, then they can't eat at all, not on a Doraisa level and not by the local custom, because Shmuel holds Meshamer Lav Ka'osa Maisadami, that watching, that guarding the produce is not considered like doing an action. And Rashi explains within Rav, Lo Shanu De'in Shomrin Ochlin Min HaTorah, the Mishnah says that they don't eat on a Doraisa level. That's Ela Shomrei Ginos Upardes, and that's if they're watching over gardens and orchards. The Havale Mechubar B'Shah She'ein Gemar Malacha, there it's attached to the ground, and it's not the moment of Gemar Malacha. Gemar Malacha by Mechubar is referring to when you're harvesting it, when you're detaching it from the ground at the time of the harvest. Hilkach Min HaTorah Lo Achel, therefore they don't eat on a Doraisa level because they're not detaching it from the ground, they're just guarding it. V'yachel Mehilchas Medina, and they're allowed to eat according to the local custom. The Kol Shekein Osa B'Mechubar, and certainly if somebody was doing work, let's say B'Mechubar Lakarka, but it wasn't the time of the harvest. Kagon Menachesh, for example, a person is weeding. Da'achel Miminag Medina, so Miminag HaMedina, again, that's not considered the Gemar Malach, it's not the harvest, but it is considered to be work. So from local custom, they would be allowed to eat. That's again what Rav says. Aval Shomrei Gitos Ve'aremos, but let's say they're watching over the wine presses or the piled up food, piled up produce, Ad Shelo Nigmara Malachtan, and this is talking before the Gemar Malacha L'Maiser, so this is before the Gemar Malacha of Maiser that they're doing this kind of watching. Ochel Af Min HaTorah. So according to Rav, that you're allowed to eat even on a Doraisa level. Kidin Osa B'Talish, that's a regular work you're doing with detached produce. That's Rav's understanding. And Rashi continues, Shmuel Amar, and Shmuel says, Lo Shanu Da'achli Mia Mehilchas Medina. What it really means is that when are they allowed to eat according to local custom? Ela Shomrei Talish. That's only if they're watching over detached food. Even by detached food, according to Shmuel, they do not get on a Doraisa level because watching over produce is not considered work. Aval Shomrei Mechuber, but if they're watching over produce that's still attached to the ground, afilu mehilchas medina lo, they don't even get there from the local custom, they're not even going to get to eat. The meshamer lavo samaisu, because according to Shmuel, meshamer is not considered work at all, it's not considered labor, hilkach lo achal midoraisa, that's why one cannot eat on a doraisa level, even when we're talking about the tolush, even when we're talking about the detached produce. And the Gemara continues, Meisiv Ravacha bar Ravuna. Ravacha bar Ravuna asks a question on Shmuel from the following brayso: Hamashamer sapar, if somebody's watching over the para aduma, mitame begadim, so that's considered to be labor, that's considered to be working with the para aduma, and therefore the clothing that are upon him are going to be tameh. And the Gemara says, V'yamrin Meshamer lavko samaisadami. If you're going to say that watching is not considered doing an activity, like Shmuel says, Amay metame begadim, why should his begadim, why should his garments become tameh? Amar Rabba Barula says, Gezeira, it's really just a Gezeira, Shema Yozes Ba'aver. Maybe he'll move a limb of the Para Aduma, and therefore because of the Gezeira we're talking about, Tumas Begadim, that's how Shmuel will resolve this brayso. And Rashi explains, Hamashamer para aduma mishchitasav yad kinos afra. We're talking about from the moment of shchita until they gather the ashes, you're watching over the para aduma. Metame begadim shalav, so then the begadim that he has are going to be tameh. The begadim that he's wearing, the Tanan, as we learned in the Mishnah, kol ha'oskin bepara mitchila v'yad sof. Anybody who's dealing with para aduma from beginning to end, metam and begadim, the person's garments are tameh. And the Gemara answered on behalf of Shmuel, Gezeira Shema Yazis Ba'aver. It's a Gezeira midrabbanan. Maybe you'll move a limb of the paraduma of Rabbanan who the Gazru al Hatum. It's the Rabbanan that said that there's a Gezeira. The Rabbanan made a Gezeira that there's Tumah here. V'lav midoraisa. It's not considered to be Tumah midoraisa, and that's the answer for Shmuel. And the Gemara continues, Mesav Rav Kahana. Rav Kahana asks the following question from a brayso: Hamishamer arba v'chamisha mikshos. Let's say a person is watching, he's guarding 4 or 5 cucumber fields belonging to different people. Harei lo yimali kreiso me'achad mehen. He shouldn't eat when he's entitled to food. He shouldn't eat all from one field. Ela mikol echad v'echad ochel afi cheshbon. But he should eat proportionately from all of the various fields. And so the Gemara says, V'yamr mishamer lav kosa ma'isa dami. If you say mishamer is lav kosa ma'isa dami, and the assumption over here is we're talking about produce which is attached to the ground, so he's not entitled according to Shmuel, amayochel, so why is he eating? And the Gemara answers, Amar Rav Shimi Barashi. Rav Shimi Barashi says, Ba'kurin shanu. We're not talking about where it's attached to the ground, it's actually detached from the ground. So since it's detached from the ground, Shmuel said that mehilchas medina, the person is actually allowed to eat. But the Gemara says, 1 second, Akurn, but if it's detached from the ground, valo nigmra malachtan lemaiser. But then you have a gemar malacha for meiser, and then nobody, there should be no eating whatsoever in such a situation. And the Gemara answers, shalom nitel pikes shalahem. The blossom hasn't been taken, so you don't really have a gemar malacha in terms of the obligation of meiser. So again, in that situation, according to Shmuel, mehilchas medina, based on the local custom, even though watching is not really considered to be work, it's not considered to be labor, but mehilchas medina, the worker is allowed to eat. And Rashi explains, mikshos shegedelin ben kishu, and again, cucumbers are growing in these fields. Arbava chamisha mikshos shel chamisha anoshim. It belongs to 5 different people. These various fields. Amay ochel. So why is he eating? Ha'amrit shomrei mechubar afilu mehilchas medina lo achli. Didn't Shmuel say that if you're watching over mechubar lakarka, even from local custom, they can't eat? El al karchach kosamai zadami. Rather, you have to say that it is considered like labor. Va'achli miya mehilchas medina, and then they're eating mehilchas medina. Kimas nisan, like we said, according to the Mishnah, according to Rav's understanding, mechlal de shomrei talash afilu midoraisa nami. That would imply that if they're watching over detached, even on a doraisa level, they could eat. So again, how does Shmuel resolve this brisa? And the Gemara answered, Bakurin shanu. We're talking where it's already uprooted, it's detached. Akurin mishar shein, they're uprooted from their roots. In kishuin shavahem shlahachi karile mikshos v'lo karile kishuin. Rashi says that's actually why it's called mikshos and not kishuin, because it was uprooted. Umishum deshomrei talosh heim ochli mehilchas medina kimas nisan, because they're watching over detached produce, they can eat mehilchas medina according to Shmuel. And again, we're talking where there was no gemar malacha for meiser b'shalom nitel pikas shalahen, when the blossom wasn't taken. V'yamar mar la'el b'pirkin to kishun misha yifkas. So we said earlier that cucumbers only when you take the blossom is it considered a gemar malacha. So that's how Shmuel explains this brisa. And the Gemara continues, Amar Ravashi. Ravashi says, Kivasi de Shmuel Mestabra, makes sense to say like Shmuel, Tetanan, because we learned in the earlier Mishnah, it said, V'elu ochlin min haTorah, it said the following workers can eat midoraisa, and we said, Osa b'mechubar lakarka b'shas gemar malach, if somebody's working with produce that's attached to the ground at the time of the gemar malach, again, that was talking about gemar malach means the time of the harvest, when you're detaching it at that time, uvitolish, and then the Mishnah said by tolish, in these situations of detached produce, the worker is allowed to take them from the produce that's before the gemar malacha, meaning before there's an obligation of meiser. And so that part of the Mishnah, Mechlal, that part of the Mishnah implies the Ika de Loka Achel Min HaTorah, that there is some kind of worker who on a doraisa level is not going to eat, Ela Mehilchas Medina, but according to local custom, he'll be able to eat. And Ema Seifa, now look at the end of that very Mishnah, it says, Ve'elu She'enon Ochlin, then it says that the following are situations where they do not eat. Now, my Einon Ochlin, what does it mean when the Mishnah goes on to say the following don't eat? You already implied that there's a case where they don't eat. So what does it mean when the Mishnah says the following don't eat? Ilema She'en Ochlin Min HaTorah Ela Mehilchas Medina. If you're saying that they don't eat midoraisa, but they do eat based on local custom, Hainu Reisha, that would be the same as the Reisha. You already inferred that from the Reisha. Why would the Sefer repeat the same thing? That's essentially what the Gemara is bringing a proof based on. Elalav, rather is it not She'en Ochlin Lo Min HaTorah V'Lo Mehilchas Medina. The end of that Mishnah actually means there are workers who don't eat on a doraisa level and they don't eat based on local custom. Umay Niu, so what would be examples of that? And this only works according to Shmuel. The examples would be Osa b'mechubar lakarka. Let's say a person is working with produce that's attached to the ground, b'shah she'ein gemar malacha, at a time that it's not the gemar malacha, it's not a time of detaching it from the ground as part of the harvest. So the Mishnah seems to be implying that the workers don't eat at all, even from local custom, and that's what Shmuel said. That's not like Rav. V'chol shekein, and certainly shomrei ginus upardesos, people who are just guards over gardens or orchards. So again, over there, you're not even really doing real work, and again, that's mechubar lakarka. It's not a time of gemar malacha. Certainly, even based on local custom, they're not going to be able to eat, and that supports Shmuel. And Rashi explains, Kishmuel Mestabra, it makes sense like Shmuel, Da'osa b'mechubra b'shah she'ena gemar malacha, that if somebody's working with produce that's still attached to the ground and it's not the time of the gemar malacha, the time of the harvest, afilu mehilchas medina lo achel, he's not even going to eat according to local custom. V'kol shekein, and certainly that's true, shomrei mechubar, where they're just guarding over attached produce, to have a shah she'ena gemar malacha, again, that's a time when it's not, that's a kind of work not of gemar malacha. V'lav hosa maisu, they're not even really doing any labor, umas nisan b'shomer talish, and then again, you'll explain, like Shmuel said that our Mishnah is talking about when someone is guarding produce that is detached from the ground. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Arba Shomrim Hain, there are 4 kinds of guards. Shomer Chinam, somebody who's watching something for free. V'hashoel, a borrower. Nosei Sachar, somebody who's being paid to watch. V'hasocher, and a renter. And the Mishnah says, Shomer Chinam nishva ala kol. Shomer Chinam, he has to take an oath regarding anything that happens to the item. V'hashoel mishalim esakol, the borrower, he has to pay for anything if anything happens to the item. V'nosei Sachar v'hasocher, when it comes to a Shomer Sachar and a Socher, somebody who's being paid to watch, and somebody who's a renter, nishboim al hashvura v'al hashvuya v'al hamesa, they take an oath regarding, let's say, the animal broke a leg, or let's say is taken captive, or let's say it died, umeshalmin, but they pay as aveda v'saganeva, they pay if it is lost or stolen. And Rashi explains, Shomer Chinam nishba ala kol, Shomer Chinam takes an oath on everything, meaning al kol ha'ma'oros haksuvos b'shar shomrim, anything that happens to the item that's mentioned by the other shomrim, l'chiev, let's say it's something that they're chayev for, hu nishba, he takes an oath on that, shekach also, he takes an oath that that particular thing happened, upater, and then he will be exempt, ulakamon b'hashol yolef l'kula masisun mikroy. Later on in Perek HaShol, we'll learn all of this from Sukkim, al hakol, and then it said when it comes to a shoel, so he's obligated to pay for everything. That means to say geneva via aveda v'onsen, whether it's stolen, whether it's lost, or whether there is an accident. And the Gemara says, Man tana arba shomrim, who's the author of this Mishnah that has 4 kinds of watchmen? Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba bar Avur. Rav Nachman says that Rabba bar Avur says Rabbi Meir. Our Mishnah follows Rabbi Meir. Amar le Rava le Rav Nachman. Rava said to Rav Nachman, Mi iko de lesle arba shomrin. Is there anyone that disagrees that there are 4 shomrin? What does this exchange even mean to say that our Mishnah is Rabbi Meir, who holds there are 4 shomrim? Everybody agrees there are 4 shomrim. Amar le said to him, Hachi kamin alach. This is what I'm saying to you. Man tana socher kenosei socher. Who is the Tana of our Mishnah that says that a socher, a renter, is the same as a nosei socher, as a paid watchman? Rabbi Meir. That's Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir is the one that says a socher is like a shomer socher. The Gemara says, what do you mean? Rabbi Meir ipcha. On the contrary, Rabbi Meir seems to say the exact opposite. The Tanya, as we learned in a brisa, socher kates and mashalim. How does a renter pay? Rabbi Meir omer kashomer chinam. Rabbi Meir says a socher is like a shomer chinam, not a shomer socher. Rabbi Yehuda omer kashomer socher. It's Rabbi Yehuda that says that a socher is like a shomer socher. And the Gemara says to that, Rabba bar Avua ipcha katani. Rabba bar Avua had that reversed. He has Rabbi Meir saying that a socher is like a shomer socher. And the Gemara continues, Ihachi, if so, Arba, why does it say in the Mishnah there are 4 shomrim, shlosha ninu, aren't there just 3 shomrim? And the Gemara says to that, Amar of Nachman bar Yitzchak, or Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, Dalid shomrim, there are 4 shomrim, v'dineim shlosha, there are just 3 sets of laws, because the law by a shomer socher and by a socher, those laws are identical. And the Gemara continues, Hahu raya dehava koroi chayusa aguda de nahar Papa. There was a shepherd who was taking animals along the banks of the river Papa. Sharg chad minayi, one of the animals slipped, v'naflas lamai, it fell in the water and drowned. Asa lakame, the rabbi came before Rabba, upatra, he exempted the shepherd. The shepherd is essentially a paid watchman, and he says he's pater in that case. Amar, he said, meaning to say Rabba said, my havalei lemevad, what else could the shepherd have done? And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Tzadi Gimel Amud Beis.